3 men broke out of the most secure prison in America, and then vanished. No bodies, no arrests, not a single confirmed sighting for over 50 years. The FBI, Coast Guard, even the military searched for them. And yet, the case is still open to this day. So who were these guys, and how did they pull off what was supposed to be impossible? On paper, the government declared them dead, drowned in the icy waters of San Francisco Bay during the escape. Case closed, right? But then, in 2013, something strange happened. A handwritten letter showed up at the San Francisco Police Department. It read, "I escaped from Alcatraz in 1962. Some say it was fake. Others argue no one could have survived that swim. But just a year later, scientists ran a simulation, and it might have changed everything. So did they really escape? By the end of this story, you'll have your answer. What made Alcatraz so inescapable in the first place? Alcatraz, better known as the Rock, wasn't just a prison. It was the US government's most hardcore version of "you're not getting out of here." It was the place they sent the worst of the worst, guys who were too dangerous or too slippery for anywhere else. Sitting about 1.25 miles off the coast of San Francisco, the island started out as a military fort back in the 1850s. But by 1934, it had been turned into a federal prison. From the start, Alcatraz was meant to be the last stop. Maximum security, bare minimum privileges. No second chances, no fluff. The place was tough, and it was built like a fortress. The main prison building, finished in the early 1900s, had 4 blocks of cells, a dining hall, a hospital, a library, and the warden's offices. But don't let that list fool you. This wasn't a cozy setup. The cells were tiny, stripped down, and locked up with steel bars that couldn't be tampered with. Guards counted the prisoners constantly, sometimes up to 13 times a day. From the 1930s up until the early 60s, Alcatraz locked up some of the most notorious names in the country. Al Capone was one. So was Machine Gun Kelly. The rules there were brutal, the daily routine was even worse, and honestly, if you ended up on Alcatraz, hope was probably the first thing to go. But then in June of 1962, 4 inmates decided they weren't going to accept that. Frank Morris, the Anglin brothers, John and Clarence, and another guy named Alan West started hatching a plan. Not just any plan. The plan. One that would go down in history. They weren't just trying to bust out of a cell, they were going up against a system that was built to be unbeatable. And slowly, quietly, over the next few months, they turned their prison cells into a full-on escape launch pad. The real foundation of the Alcatraz escape plan wasn't just clever thinking. It was built on the crumbling structure of the prison itself. Frank Morris, the Anglin brothers, and Alan West discovered that the concrete behind the air vents beneath their sinks was badly damaged by salt and age. That gave them an opening, literally. Working over several months, they slowly chipped away at the weakened wall behind their sinks. Their tools, metal spoons taken from the dining hall, saw blades they found or stole, and even a drill they built from an old vacuum cleaner motor. It wasn't strength that got them through, it was patience and precision. They worked quietly and carefully every night. During the day, they hid the holes with cardboard and fake vent covers made from papier-mâché. They even used art supplies from the prison library to paint them so they matched the walls exactly. To cover the noise of scraping and drilling, Morris used his accordion during music hour. Its loud, wheezy sound masked their work, turning the cell block into a secret construction site. Once the holes were big enough to crawl through, the men entered the unguarded corridor behind their cells. From there, they climbed up to an unused level above the cell block. That's where they built a hidden workshop to store materials and assemble their raft and paddles. The upper levels of Alcatraz hadn't been updated in years. They were leftovers from the island's military days, with maintenance tunnels that were rarely checked. In fact, some investigators later said those tunnels were rotting and breaking up. That neglect gave the escape team just enough space and just enough privacy to keep going without getting caught. One of the final steps was getting access to the ventilation shaft at the top of the building. The men climbed 30 feet using old plumbing pipes and carefully removed the vent cover. To keep the grate looking untouched, they even made a fake bolt out of soap and used it to seal the opening back up. By the time everything was in place, they had carved out a hidden, almost surgical escape route. From the back of their cells, through the walls, up into the prison's forgotten spaces, and all the way to the roof. They didn't just find a way out. They used the prison's own age and design flaws against it. And in doing so, they built the most detailed and undetected escape path Alcatraz had ever seen. Once the men had carved out their escape route through the prison walls, they had to solve one final life-or-death challenge. how to get off the island. Swimming across the freezing waters of San Francisco Bay wasn't an option. The current was strong, the water was cold, and the shore was nearly 2 miles away. They needed a way to float across, something they could build and hide, and something that would actually hold together in the rough water. Their answer was surprisingly simple: raincoats. Over time, they managed to collect more than 50 prison-issued raincoats, either by stealing them or convincing other inmates to give them up. Using thread from the prison's work areas, they stitched the raincoats together into a raft roughly 6 feet by 14 feet. Then, to make it waterproof, they melted rubber and sealed the seams using steam pipes from the prison's plumbing system. It could be folded up and hidden, but when inflated, it was large enough to carry them all. They also made life vests from raincoats, sealing them tight to help them float if the raft failed. One of the most clever parts of their plan was how they inflated the raft. They took a concertina, a kind of small accordion, and modified it into a makeshift air pump. It wasn't fancy, but it worked. Bit by bit, it helped fill the raft with enough air to hold all 3 men. By this point, they weren't just prisoners. They were inventors, builders, and planners. Even the paddles were homemade, likely built from plywood scraps they found during work duty. Everything they needed was either stolen, repurposed, or built in secret in their hidden workshop above the cell block. When the night came, they quietly carried everything to the northeastern edge of the island and prepared to launch. This was the final leap, from the safety of the prison walls into the unknown of the bay. They had built their way out with scraps. Now they were betting their lives on it. But what happened once they pushed off into the cold, dark bay? That's where the mystery begins. On the night of June 11th, 1962, everything was in place. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers crawled through the holes they'd spent months digging behind their cells. From there, they climbed up a network of pipes inside the utility corridor and made their way to the roof. Everything had to be timed perfectly. One wrong move, one loud noise, and it could all fall apart. To buy themselves time, they left dummy heads in their beds, carefully crafted from soap, toilet paper, paint, and real hair they'd gathered from the barber shop. In the dim light, guards doing a quick head count would see what looked like 3 sleeping inmates. As the prison quieted down, the men silently crossed the rooftop, staying low and out of sight. Then they shimmied down the outer wall using a stolen electrical cord they had turned into a rope. Once on the ground, they hurried across a patch of open space, slipped through a fence, and reached the shoreline on the northeast tip of the island. There they unfolded their handmade raft, used their concertina air pump to inflate it, and at around 11 p.m., they pushed off into the dark, cold waters of San Francisco Bay. Using their handmade paddles, they began making their way north toward Angel Island, about 2 miles away. By morning, they were gone. Back in their cells, the guards saw nothing. Prison staff didn't even realize what had happened until the next roll call, nearly 10 hours later. That's when a guard tried to wake John Anglin and discovered his head rolled right onto the floor. Once the prison realized what had happened, the response was immediate. Sirens blared across the island, and within minutes the largest manhunt in Alcatraz history was underway. The FBI, Coast Guard, local police, and even military helicopters were called in. Boats searched every inch of San Francisco Bay. Officers combed Angel Island and the surrounding shorelines. Divers plunged into the freezing water looking for any sign of the escapees. It didn't take long to find clues. About a day after the escape, investigators discovered a homemade paddle floating near Angel Island. Then they found a torn life vest washed up on the nearby shore. A few days later, a plastic-wrapped wallet was found, filled with family photos, names, and addresses. It was linked to Clarence Anglin. These finds suggested the men had at least reached the area near Angel Island. But beyond that, the trail went cold. No bodies were ever recovered. And despite months of searching, including roadblocks, house-to-house checks, and tracking known relatives, the men were never found. The FBI kept the case open for 17 years. During that time, they followed hundreds of tips and leads. Some claimed the men had escaped to Mexico or South America. Others said they were living in disguise somewhere in the U.S. But without solid proof, the FBI finally closed the case in 1979. They declared the men presumed drowned in the cold waters of San Francisco Bay. Without any hard proof that the men had survived, they considered the matter closed. Officially, the escape had failed, yet many people, including some of the investigators themselves, weren't so sure. Too many things didn't add up, and over time, the mystery only deepened. In 2013, more than 50 years after the escape, a surprising new clue reignited interest in the case. A handwritten letter sent to the San Francisco Police Department. The message claimed to be from John Anglin. In it, the writer said, "I escaped from Alcatraz in June 1962. Yes, we all made it that night, but barely." He went on to say that Frank Morris had died in 2005, Clarence Anglin in 2008, and that he himself, John, was sick and willing to turn himself in for medical treatment. The letter immediately raised questions. Was it real or just another hoax? Law enforcement quietly reopened the investigation. The letter was tested for fingerprints, DNA, and handwriting. Forensic experts examined it carefully, hoping to confirm if it truly came from John Anglin. But the results were inconclusive. The handwriting didn't match known samples. No usable fingerprints or DNA could be confirmed. The letter was mysterious enough to be taken seriously, but not solid enough to be trusted as fact. For years, the public didn't even know the letter existed. That changed in 2018, when the story was finally reported by a local CBS news station, KPIX. The timing, the details, and the emotional message inside gave new life to the legend. Could this be the most direct evidence that at least one of the men had survived? The letter didn't prove anything, but it raised enough doubt and enough curiosity to keep the debate alive. For years, most officials believed the same thing. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers didn't survive their escape. The waters around Alcatraz were too cold, too fast, and too deadly. Even Warden Richard Willard, in a 1964 interview with the BBC, said, "Do you think you could make it?" It summed up what many thought. The escape was daring, but the Bay would have claimed them. In 1979, the FBI officially closed the case. They declared the men legally dead. But over time, that theory started to fall apart, especially once science got involved. In 2014, a group of Dutch researchers used computer simulations to study the tides from the night of the escape. What they found changed everything. According to their models, if the escapees launched their raft between 11 p.m. and midnight, a window that matches the timeline, they could have been carried by the current straight to Angel Island. This wasn't just speculation. It was scientific modeling that showed the escape was possible, as long as the timing was right. That research brought new attention to the 2013 confession letter and to all the earlier clues, the discovered paddle, the personal items, and even parts of the raft. Piece by piece, the mystery started to look more like a real escape that may have worked. Despite the growing evidence, U.S. Marshals still believe the men vanished completely, possibly living quiet, law-abiding lives under new identities. Even today, the case is still open. In 2022, investigators released updated age progression images showing what Morris and the Anglin brothers might look like now. The goal? To see if someone, somewhere, might recognize them. This escape has become more than just a prison break. It's one of America's most lasting unsolved mysteries, a story where facts and theories still fight for the truth. Because at the heart of it all, this story isn't just about breaking out of a prison, it's about outsmarting the system itself. So what really happened that night in 1962? Did three men armed with nothing but determination, a homemade raft, and a clever plan actually pull off the impossible? Or did the waters of San Francisco Bay claim their lives, just like the authorities long believed? For over 60 years, the story of Alcatraz has lived in a strange place between myth and reality. There's evidence, there's science, and there are countless theories. But no one knows for sure what happened after that final hole in the wall, and maybe that's why this story continues to capture us. It's a mystery that refuses to be solved, at least not completely. Until one day, maybe someone comes forward. Or maybe the truth is already out there, hidden in plain sight.